In today's brief, we'll talk about shocking losses near Donetsk, indoctrinating children, and erasing a red line. I'm Linnea, and today is Friday, October 20th, 2023. You're listening to the Ukraine War Brief podcast, where we bring you up to speed on the war in Ukraine in about 20 minutes or less. Let's get started with the news from the front. Yesterday was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day for Russian equipment. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or GSAFU, report shows massive Russian losses on Thursday, including 55 tanks, 120 armored combat vehicles, or ACVs, 29 artillery systems, 8 unmanned aerial vehicles, called UAVs or drones, and 1,380 personnel. Those numbers are absurd, and a lot of them come from the Avdiivka front in Donetsk Oblast. Satellite imagery shows at least 63 units of Russian equipment destroyed near Krasnohorivka, just 25 kilometers west of the city of Donetsk. Ukrainian telegram channel Deep State stated that the number of Russian soldiers killed there is likely measured in the hundreds. Oleksandr Stupun, spokesperson for the Joint Press Center of the Defense Forces of the Tavria Front, reported that due to the success of Ukrainian air defense, Russian Ka-52 combat and reconnaissance helicopters are forced to operate at a distance, out of the range of Ukrainian air defense. He noted that the attack helicopters are far less effective at a distance, but that, quote, the Russians are simply afraid now, end quote. In the southern theater of operations, Ukrainian General Oleksandr Tarnavsky reported that Ukrainian forces have had partial success southwest of Verbove in the Tokmak direction in Zaporizhia Oblast, advancing up to a kilometer on October 17th. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, wrote in their assessment on October 19th that Russian sources continue to stress out about larger-than-usual Ukrainian ground operations on the occupied left bank of the Dnipro River in Kherson Oblast, and Ukrainian forces likely maintain some limited presence in that area. Yesterday, Russian sources claimed that 2 Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups crossed the river and overwhelmed Russian forces, managing to gain a foothold in the village of Kryki, which is 2 kilometers inland from the riverbank. Ukrainian forces were pushed back to the outskirts of the village after a Russian counterattack, but reportedly still control some houses in the village. In the Black Sea, ships from the Bulgarian and Romanian navies have begun trawling for sea mines along the Ukrainian shipping corridor off the coast of Bulgaria, according to Andriy Klimenko, head of the monitoring group for the Institute for Black Sea Strategic Studies. Sea mines present a significant hazard to vessels on the Black Sea, as well as to coastal communities, and there have already been multiple incidents where floating mines hit civilian cargo vessels. In the temporarily occupied territories, explosions were reported in Sevastopol in Krim, also called Crimea, on October 18th, and smoke was reported near Sakharna-Kholovka. Russian-appointed Governor Mikhail Razvozhayev stated that a missile had been downed in the area and appeared to have exploded in a field. Ukrainian telegram channel Astra reported that a missile had struck a Russian Black Sea Fleet weapons depot near Sakharna-Kholovka, causing considerable damage and wounding a Russian serviceman. Russia does appear to be beefing up security in the area, with satellite images showing 4 newly deployed MiG-31 fighter jets at Belbek Airfield in Sevastopol, joining the Su-30s and Su-27s. Russian President/dictator Vladimir Putin announced earlier in the week that Russian jets equipped with Kh-47 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles would be patrolling the airspace over the Black Sea on a regular basis, which could very well be those MiG-31s. The introduction of the MiG-31 patrols is perceived to be a threat against international shipping vessels that are defying the de facto Russian blockade and continuing to ship grain and other goods out of Ukraine. Back in September, we reported on the addition of military-like coursework to school curricula in Russia and the occupied territories. Taking it a step further, Russian occupation authorities are now opening military training centers in occupied Luhansk and other occupied regions, specifically for teenage boys aged 14 to 17. According to the Luhansk Oblast Military Administration, the centers reportedly plan to train up to 4,000 boys in specialty military occupations in which Russia lacks personnel. Even more alarming, the so-called educators at these centers have been directed to involve the children in propaganda movements and monitor their activity online, reporting children who, quote, write something contradictory, in their opinion, on the internet, end quote. It is unclear at this time if children will be enrolled at these centers with or without their or their family's consent. If you're enjoying the episode, please rate us and leave a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us via email at social@borlingon.media. That's BORLINGON.media. On the home front, writer and former military officer of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, Ilarion Pavlyuk, has been appointed head of the Press and Information Department of the Ministry of Defense, or MOD, the position previously held by Hanna Malyar. In the past, Pavlyuk represented the central TV and radio studio of the MOD. According to Catherine Baumberger, head of the International Commission on Missing Persons, or ICMP, around 30,000 civilians have gone missing in Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022. She added that, quote, before the invasion, there were already a large number of missing persons since 2014, and I first came here in 2014 after the discovery of mass graves in Slovyansk. But those numbers, although high, were not as high as they are today. Now they are much higher, and their numbers continue to grow. Therefore, it is very important that all these facts are verified in court and that these investigations be conducted by judicial institutions. End quote. So how do 30,000 people go missing? Baumberger said they aren't entirely sure who that number includes, but the missing individuals could be people who are alive but separated from their families, including children who have been illegally deported, or could be people who are in prison and not given the opportunity to communicate with family or loved ones, or people who have died in hostilities but whose bodies haven't been identified and their families don't know where they are. Speaking of incomplete accounting, let's talk about the Russian Federation. According to the Security Service of Ukraine, or SBU, the Kremlin-linked Russian Orthodox Church is building and managing private military companies, or PMCs, that recruit and train mercenaries for deployment in Ukraine. The SBU states that funding for the PMCs reportedly comes from financial and industrial groups close to Putin under the guise of so-called charitable contributions for, quote, construction of churches, end quote. Cited as an example is the St. Andrew's Cross organization based in the Kronstadt Naval Cathedral in St. Petersburg, called, quote, the first PMC under the Russian Orthodox Church, end quote, by Russian media outlet Bloknot. The Kronstadt-based PMC is recruiting local parishioners, with preference for those who have military experience, and providing them with training for combat deployment in Ukraine. According to the SBU, quote, in order to disguise combat training, their organizers conduct the training of recruits exclusively within the walls of the cathedral, as well as on special training grounds of the Russian Federation, end quote. An air defense missile production facility has been opened in the Rudnevo Industrial Park in Moscow, according to Russian media outlet Meduza. The plant reportedly has a footprint of almost 94 square kilometers, and, snuggled up close to a residential area, is only 500 meters away from the nearest apartment block. That's like 6 blocks away. I'm sure there's no possible way that this could go badly. Russian propagandists invented an international incident last weekend, with leading Russian state media channels and a Bulgarian news portal spreading a story about an alleged shootout in Sudan between the Ukrainian military and the Sudanese armed forces that allegedly resulted in fatalities on both sides. In an effort to grant their tall tale legitimacy, the propagandists refer to so-called Sudanese media outlet Al-Mashhad al-Yemeni as the origin of the story. First of all, that's not a Sudanese outlet, it's Yemeni. More importantly, no such story appears anywhere on their site, nor did it prior to Russian media's claims. And every link to the alleged source goes to al-Mashhad al-Yemeni's homepage rather than any specific article. In news worldwide, a report released by the UK's National Audit Office states that 4,890 Ukrainian refugee families, about 8% of those taken in as part of the UK's Homes for Ukraine refugee program, have been or continue to be at risk of homelessness, largely because their initial hosts can no longer continue to accommodate them. The program doesn't provide infinite support for Ukrainians in the UK, and the number of families at risk is likely to increase as sponsorship arrangements end and the 3-year work visas issued through the program expire. While visiting China, Putin made a statement regarding Ukraine's acquisition of U.S.-provided ATACMS long-range missiles, calling it a, quote, great mistake on the part of the U.S. Not that long ago, Putin considered the delivery of ATACMS to Ukraine to be a so-called red line. But like every other red line so far, he's downplayed the possible impact of the munition, saying it is, quote, completely unable to drastically change the situation along the line of contact. It's impossible, end quote, and noted that he was confident the Russian military would be able to repel ATACMS strikes. It looks like they'll have plenty of opportunities to practice. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba announced in a recent interview that the U.S. will be supplying the Ukrainian military with ATACMS on an ongoing basis, saying, quote, thank you to the United States for implementing the agreements and strengthening our firepower, end quote. That's the brief for today. Remember to check your sources and don't fall for propaganda. Join us on YouTube and TikTok for more Ukraine content and live news reports. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our work on Substack. We'll be back on Monday with more updates. Until then, stay safe, everyone. Do побачення.